I've been doing some predictions in my videos regarding AMD, Intel and Nvidia in the last year, and so far I've gotten most of them right. Back in March, when my channel had less than 2,000 subscribers, I made a video about Nvidia launching the RTX cards at the end of the year, and that ended up happening just as I described it. But I also made a video saying that AMD would be responding with their own real-time ray tracing card, and that hasn't happened, at least not yet. The very nature of speculation is that sometimes you'll get things right and sometimes you'll get them wrong. The point is to generate discussion and, more importantly, to hopefully inform you about what might be just over the horizon. In my video from last week, I again made some predictions regarding the upcoming Ryzen CPUs, and wouldn't you know it, just this week, Jim from the YouTube channel AdoredTV received some leaked information about AMD's upcoming Ryzen and Navi products that match pretty well with what I've been predicting, although with some oddities here and there which we'll be discussing in a second. It's easy to get excited about the momentum that AMD is gaining and to lose focus of some very important things, so I hope you guys can stick around until the end of this video, as I'll discuss these leaks first and then move on to the meat of the video towards the end, where we'll see how AMD can not only match Nvidia's market share, but crush them. Now, of all people, I'd probably be the one more inclined to believe these leaks because the numbers are basically a carbon copy of my recent predictions, so it's important that I take a step back and analyze them without confirmation bias. I think it's important that we detach ourselves emotionally from what we want AMD to launch so that we can more clearly see what AMD can realistically achieve. Looking at the Navi leaks first, in my video High-End Navi Confirmed, I revealed some info that a source gave me and talked about two Navi GPUs launching early next year. In these new leaks by Jim from AdoredTV, it appears that the info I got was true, and of course having different sources provide the same information gives both leaks more credence. In that video I talked about a full Navi card with performance equivalent to an RTX 2070 for around $300. And this new leak suggests that this card, supposedly named RX 3080, will be around the Vega 64 level plus 15% performance. In other words, about the same level as an RTX 2070 for $250. Now, my source gave me the prices in ranges, and in the case of this GPU, I was given a range of $199 to $299. AMD typically don't give their partners precise pricing until very close to the GPU's announcement. At the time, I felt like $300 was more realistic, and I still feel that way. I don't see why AMD would launch this card at $250, although I would certainly love for them to do so. $300 is already incredibly competitive and almost half of what Nvidia is charging for the RTX 2070. I think it's more likely that the card will be announced at $300 in January, but probably launch later at a higher price, similar to what happened with Vega. Will it be $350, $400? I don't know, but I think a $250 MSRP is unjustifiably low from a business perspective, and too close in pricing to the cut-down version, which will cost $200. So I'm sticking with my predicted price of $300 for this one. Another thing that I found odd about this leak was the naming of the card, supposedly RX 3080. AMD have played this game in the past with their chipsets, where they named them similarly to Intel's chipsets but with a higher number. That's some psychological warfare right there, and yes, some uninformed consumers might look at the cards on the shelf and think that an RX 3080 is better than an RTX 2080, for instance. But probably the biggest advantage for naming the Navi cards in this manner would be to connect the GPU branding more closely to the CPU branding, so you'd have the Ryzen 3000 series and the Radeon 3000 series. In their earnings calls and in the next Horizon event, Lisa Su has been talking a lot about creating an ecosystem for consumers, so connecting the Ryzen and Radeon brands further does make a lot of sense. Now, personally, I think it would be a mistake to name the cards so closely to Nvidia's RTX naming, and this relates to what I'll be discussing later in the video, so we'll come back to that. The second GPU that I talked about in my video where I discussed Navi was a cut-down version of the one we just talked about, with performance levels similar to the GTX 1070 for around $200. And again, this new leak from AdoredTV seems to confirm what I said in that video, with the Navi RX 3070 with a performance level level of a Vega 56, which is similar to that of a GTX 1070 for $200. Price and performance-wise, this is exactly where I put it in my video. This coincides with the information I received, so no additional comments there. So we have this supposed RX 3070 for 1440p gaming, the RX 3080 as an entry point to 4K gaming, so that means that there should be a Navi card for 1080p, right? Well, this third card is new to me and my source didn't mention anything about it when we last spoke, which doesn't mean that it's not real. Supposedly called the RX 3060, it will come in at $129 with 4GB of GDDR6 at around the performance level of an RX 580. And even though it would make a lot of sense to have a third Navi in the product stack specifically targeting the 1080p resolution for gaming, it feels really odd to me that AMD would release the RX 590 now at such a high price when they have a similar card coming out so soon at half the price. In AMD's Q3 earnings call, Lisa Su had this to say: "As we go into 2019, you would expect that we're still going to need a bit of time to work through some of this graphics channel inventory that we have. I think the first half of 2019 will not be very strong for graphics, but we have a number of product launches coming up. We need to work off some of this channel inventory that's in place and then go back to a more typical seasonality, which would see the second half stronger than the first." So from what Lisa said, AMD already have tons of cards in inventory which will take another 4 to 6 months to sell, and on top of that they just launched a card that has pretty much the same performance as this leaked low-end Navi. So to me this suggests that this RX 3060 is a card that will come to market much later in 2019. If the RX 590 hadn't come out, I could definitely see this low-end Navi being launched alongside the other two Navis sometime between March and June, but as things stand, I just don't see it. Just imagine how AMD's AIB partners would feel if they were now stuck with thousands of RX 590s that no one would buy. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it logically. So are these new Navi leaks real? I think they are, because they match the information that I was given by someone in the industry. I saw some YouTubers and publications dismissing these leaks too quickly, and maybe that's because people have just become so used to getting ripped off that the idea of a $300 card similar to an RTX 2070 seems crazy. So yeah, I'll stick with the information that I was given, and that is that we will be getting a Navi card with a performance level of an RTX 2070 for $300 and a cut down version for $200 with a performance level similar to a GTX 1070. And like I said, I can see the low-end Navi launching later in the year, but not at the same time as the other two. The other leaks that Jim got referred to the upcoming Ryzen CPUs, and again, it would seem I was pretty close with my estimations in my last video, assuming that the leak is real, and in some cases it appears that I got the numbers exactly right. So are these leaked numbers too good to be true? I said in my previous video that I would expect the 3000 series Ryzens to be more scalable, and that seems to be the case. We can see that the frequency increases significantly as you go up the product stack, something that didn't happen with Zen and Zen Plus. However, I said that the frequencies would top out at around 4.7 GHz out of the box, with a few CPUs clocking even higher to 4.9 GHz. But it seems I was too conservative with that prediction, as we're now seeing clock speeds as high as 5 GHz in the mainstream CPUs, and 5.1 GHz in the form of a Ryzen 9 3850X. I think you could argue that my estimated numbers were optimistic at 4.7 GHz with the best chips reaching 4.9 GHz, but they definitely seem within reason to me. With this leak, however, I'm inclined to believe that some of the numbers are not entirely correct, which doesn't mean that the whole leak is fake. It just means that some of the information might be outdated or misinterpreted, but that doesn't invalidate the leak completely. So starting with the Ryzen 3s, my estimation was that they would be quad cores that could potentially go all the way up to 4.7 GHz. The new leaks suggest that there will be 3 different Ryzen 3s, all of them 6-core, one of them being a new 3300G with Navi graphics. This 3300G is what I called the Voltron chip in one of my previous videos, although I referred to it as the 3400G. So regarding the core count first, I don't see a logical reason why the Ryzen 3s wouldn't all be 6 cores instead of 4 cores as I predicted, which would mean that only the Athlon chips would be quad cores. The problem with this is that AMD have been making the Athlons as SoCs, meaning they have integrated Vega graphics, which means the next generation of Athlons would only be coming out around September of 2019. A whole year without any new quad cores seems a little bit off to me, so I'm more inclined to think that the Ryzen 3s will be quad cores and not 6 cores. This leak also doesn't list the 3400G or the 3500X, which are the logical candidates for being 6-core parts. The 2400G was very well received, and Intel's i5-8400 is also a very popular CPU, so I think it would be a mistake to remove the 3400G from the product stack or to turn it into the 3300G. Moving on to the Ryzen 5s, they are basically also in line with what I predicted. I estimated the 3600X to be 8 cores at 4.7 GHz, and this new leak suggests pretty much the same, with 3600X at 8 cores hitting 4.8 GHz. This is what I would expect to see, and I see nothing wrong with the leak in this regard. There is, however, a new 8-core APU with roughly the graphics performance of a GTX 1050, or maybe even closer to a 1050 Ti. This is the sort of APU that I would expect to see with Zen 3 when we get DDR5 support in 2020. It feels a bit strange pairing an 8-core CPU with integrated low-end graphics. It feels like the only people who would benefit from a product like this would be content creators on a budget, because a program like Adobe Premiere benefits from both a high core count and a decently powerful GPU that can render using OpenCL. For the budget-conscious gamers though, who are typically the target audience for APUs, this 3600G looks a bit out of place, especially at $200. So is this APU real? It is most definitely real, but I would be very surprised if it came out next year. I think we will see APUs like this, but probably only in 2020, not in 2019. And finally, we have the high-end parts. I estimated the Ryzen 7 3700X to be a 12-core, 24-thread CPU at 4.7 GHz, and this leak suggests that it will be 12-core and 24 threads, but at 5 GHz. I put it at $350 and the leak puts it at $330. My prediction was that only the very best silicon would hit 4.9 GHz or higher, and that's with an overclock. With a more scalable architecture, you could get lucky and get a CPU that overclocks to 4.9 GHz or even 5 GHz, but I don't think that the Ryzen 7s will come out with such high core frequencies out of the box as this leak suggests. Even if this is referring to a single core turbo, I think my estimation of 4.7 GHz is already quite optimistic for a 12-core CPU. 5 GHz seems like something that you will only achieve by overclocking the very best bin CPUs and not something that AMD would guarantee out of the box. I also predicted that we would see a 3800X with 16 cores maxing out at 4.7 GHz, and the leak suggests that there will be 2 of these special edition type CPUs, the 3800X and the 3850X. The 3800X appears to be exactly as I had predicted, although I said it would cost $500 instead of this suggested $450. $450 seems too low to me, especially as the 1950X is currently selling for $550, but the core count and the frequency are pretty much what I would expect the best of the best 7nm 16-core CPUs to be able to achieve, which is why I think the 3850X seems unlikely to me in this configuration. This would have to be some miracle level of binning, and that 5.1 GHz a single core turbo with top-of-the-line water cooling and probably an aggressive overclock. However, one thing that would be interesting to see would be a 16-core CPU that would operate at 4.3 GHz on all cores with multi-threaded workloads, but would then automatically turn half of its cores off when running games, boosting the clock speeds to 5 GHz. Intel have been doing something along these lines with their Turbo Boost Max technology, so perhaps this 3850X is operating on a similar basis, hence these crazy numbers. I'll reserve judgment on that, but I'm skeptical that we will get a CPU with such high specs so early in the 7nm process life. With Zen 3 or Zen 4, yeah, I could see 16 cores at 5.1 GHz being a reality, but probably not in 2019. Now, one point of contention in my last video was when I said that we probably wouldn't see the consumer Ryzen 3000 series have the same type of chiplet architecture as the EPYC 2 CPUs, and man did I get a lot of hate for saying that. People seem absolutely convinced that these chiplets cannot communicate with one another unless they have that I/O chip as we saw in Rome. But like I said before, unless AMD have found a magical way to eliminate latency, I think the gaming performance of a chiplet-based design would be seriously affected, and a regression on what AMD did with Zen Plus, at least until we get support for DDR5. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for repeating this, but it's not absolutely certain that the mainstream CPUs will have a separate I/O chip like in EPYC 2. There are different ways of implementing I/O. I could be wrong, I don't have a crystal ball, and yes, I am aware of the slides that AMD showed in the next Horizon event, but that is EPYC 2, and there's a lot we don't know about those chiplets. I'm just thinking about this logically. If I am wrong, I will own up to it in January when the CPUs are announced. Don't worry, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to tell me how wrong I was, and you can prepare a big fat crow for me to eat. I'll eat it. So what's my overall take on these new leaks? Are these numbers too outlandish to be real? Again, the best place to find out is at the source. Here's what Lisa Su said in the last earnings call when asked about the advantages of 7nm for the consumer CPUs. At a high level, I think 7nm gives us better density, so for a given system we can put more cores on it. It gives us better power, so that gives us total cost of ownership. And it does give us better performance as well. So for the people out there claiming that these leaks are fake because AMD can't deliver more clocks and higher frequencies and at a lower power all at the same time, there's your answer straight from Lisa Su herself. Now, that isn't to say that some of the numbers in the leak are not a bit off, as I discussed, but that is the nature of leaks. There is a lot of passion, both negative and positive, towards AMD, so I can understand why these leaks caused so much drama, but I think it's important that we don't lose focus of what really matters. And one of the questions we should be asking is, what is Intel going to do now? They are completely outclassed in every single aspect, and I find that worrying because we don't want a CPU market where the only option is AMD. We need compelling Intel products, otherwise AMD will do the same to the CPU market that Nvidia has done to the GPU market, and CPU prices will start to rise sharply. Now, before we move on to the meat of this video, I think it's interesting to put together an all AMD build using this leaked information and compare it with what the alternative teams currently have to offer. If you are someone looking to upgrade your PC next year, these hypothetical builds will probably make you think long and hard about what to save for. I suspect that most enthusiasts will probably be looking at either the 3600X or the 3700X, so let's focus on those. I'm going to assume, and I could be wrong, that the 3600X will work with a B350 motherboard and still reach the 4.7 or 4.8 GHz. Assuming that that is the case, you can put together a mid-range system with an 8-core 16-thread CPU with the Navi RX 3070 for $783 for smooth 1440p gaming. For comparison, here's what a similar performing system currently costs if you use an Intel 8-core 8-thread CPU and an Nvidia GTX 1070, $1,173. That's a difference of $390 for the same performance as the all AMD build. You could put in another Navi RX 3070 in the AMD system and it would still be cheaper than the Intel plus Nvidia combo. Let's look now at an entry-level 4K build, as I imagine a lot of you guys are considering your options regarding an upgrade to 4K next year. You can put together a build with the 3700X and a Navi 3080 with very respectable components like a 1TB SSD and a good kit of memory for $1,108. This is less than the mid-range Intel plus Nvidia combo we just saw. There is again a caveat here because we don't know if the current X370 motherboards can support the 3700X at its higher frequencies. I would expect that you'd have to pay a bit extra, probably around the $150 mark for a motherboard that can get the most out of the 3700X. And obviously depending on the game, you'd have to compromise on some graphics settings to get smooth 60 FPS at 4K with a card that is equivalent to an RTX 2070. But if you couple this with a FreeSync monitor, then a good 4K experience on the PC is no longer a pipe dream for the average enthusiast. Now let's take a look at an alternative build with similar performance from the blue and green teams. Intel currently doesn't have a 12-core CPU and probably won't have one until the summer of next year, so the closest would be the 9900K, which has 8 cores and 16 threads. Coupling that with the RTX 2070 would cost you $1,857 with current prices at the time of making this video. That is a massive difference and definitely food for thought if you are thinking about an upgrade. So at this point you are probably thinking, man, AMD is going to be killing it next year with their CPUs and GPUs, right? While that might be the case with the CPUs, we will probably see a different story with Navi. Nvidia won't stand still and will fight Navi on the pricing front, but more importantly, with propaganda. And you might think that propaganda is irrelevant because what really matters is performance and price, and why would anyone buy an RTX 2070 for $570 when they can buy the similar RX 3080 for $300? Why would anyone spend $270 more for the same card? No amount of propaganda can stop Navi from being a great success, right? Well, here's a simple exercise. This is card A and it costs $144 and will give you 62 FPS at 1080p across these fairly demanding games. And this is card B, which costs a bit more than card A at $170, and it costs more, so it should obviously perform better. Except it doesn't, and it only gives you 40 FPS at 1080p in the same set of games. So which one would you buy? The cheaper card that performs better or the more expensive card that performs worse? As some of you have probably guessed, card A is the RX 570 and card B is the GTX 1050 Ti. When we look at the Steam hardware survey, we see that the 1050 Ti has 9.35% of the market, while the RX 570 has, well, the numbers are so small it's not even discriminated on the chart, but the RX 470 has 0.25%. The 470s and 570s combined have less than 0.5% of the market. You could argue that there are a few cases where the 1050 Ti would make more sense, namely because of the power draw, and therefore OEMs might favor it. But it's not hard to figure out that the vast majority of people who bought the 1050 Ti simply bought it because it's an Nvidia card. I've talked about this example before, but this is happening across all segments where the two companies are competitive. So why are people buying the 1050 Ti 10 to 1 compared to the RX 570, especially in the age of the internet where there is plenty of information out there to compare these products and make an informed decision? And if this is happening with the current generation of cards, what can AMD possibly do to not only match Nvidia's market share, but actually crush them with Navi? Last week, Nvidia surprised most of us with the unveiling of the Titan RTX in a way that shows their expert grasp of what Edward Bernays called public relations, which is a term he coined to replace the word propaganda. In case you don't follow the tech news, basically what Nvidia did was give out Titan RTX cards to a few select so-called influencers and YouTubers. Linus from Linus Tech Tips showed the Titan on their weekly live stream, and Jay from Jay's 2 Cents showed it off in a video about galvanic corrosion. And in both cases, the idea was to show the Titan RTX kind of just sitting there, or make the reveal look accidental without drawing too much attention to it, but make it obvious enough to provoke a reaction from the audience. And the reaction was, for the most part, exactly what Nvidia wanted. People shared these videos on social media and it created anticipation for the product. Maybe not for the most of you watching this, but definitely for the target audience. As a side note, while Linus did this during the sponsor spot of his live stream, Jay did not disclose anywhere in the video or in the description or in the comments that this video was an ad for Nvidia, which it clearly was. And this is an important part of Nvidia's strategy. You see, Nvidia had a problem to solve here. How can they position this card as both a product for gaming enthusiasts but also for data scientists? How can they sell this card to these two completely different groups and justify as high a price as they can? In the official product description page, you'll see that it says that it is targeted at enthusiasts, even though Titan cards are usually seen as affordable alternatives for heavy data workloads, especially when compared to the professional-grade, expensive GPUs. Well, this is where Linus and Jay come in. They have a huge number of subscribers, and this ensures maximum exposure. That's obvious enough, but it also associates the influencer's high profile with the product. Without them realizing it, most people's brain will do the following association. If only Jay and Linus got this card and other smaller YouTubers didn't, it must mean that this card is a very exclusive product. Not just anyone will get it, even when it comes to reviewers. Also, Jay and Linus are true enthusiasts, just look at the hardware that they play around with. So this card must be the top of the top for true PC enthusiasts, with the seal of approval from these two big YouTubers. So when the new Ryzen CPUs come out next year and both Linus and Jay test them, which GPU do you think they will be using to eliminate bottlenecks? Yeah, the Titan RTX. And guess what you'll be seeing in the background of Jay's videos, even on ones that have very little to do with Nvidia? Yep, the Titan RTX. And you won't see the hashtag ad anywhere in the video description either, even though you can bet that the Titan RTX is not there in the background by accident. This is exactly the sort of propaganda that Edward Bernays, the creator of PR, used a century ago when he started dressing film stars with clothes and jewelry from companies that he represented in order to associate those brands with the Hollywood stars. I highly recommend that you watch my video titled How Nvidia Conquered the Masses if you want to know more about how Nvidia has been using this sort of propaganda for years now and to great results. Nvidia's mindshare with the mass PC consumer didn't happen overnight. Nvidia are experts at positioning their products in the minds of consumers, and this is why cards like the 1050 Ti are outselling the RX 570 by 10 to 1. High-end cards and these dream cards like the Titans sell the low-end and mid-range cards. This is something that AMD really needs to understand. Now, of course, in addition to grabbing the mindshare through clever propaganda, Nvidia does actually make really good products, but they are using the same strategy as Apple when it comes to positioning. If you look at Apple adverts, they don't mention how good their products are. Instead, they show you the types of people who purchase those products. So before there were even specs or an official announcement for the Titan RTX cards, Nvidia were already positioning their brand with the two largest tech YouTubers out there. The specs, those can come later, they are not really that important. This type of approach to propaganda is very powerful because once you brand your customers, you can start charging more and more for your products. This is exactly what Nvidia are doing. They have branded their customers who now just accept the Nvidia tax. And the more you pay for their products, the more you'll be inclined to defend your purchase by coming up with all sorts of advantages why you made the choice that you did. The Nvidia drivers are better, the AMD cards blow up, the AMD cards draw more power. You'll come up with all sorts of reasons why you made your decision, when in reality your decision was emotional, not logical. The reason why I'm saying this is not because I want you to feel bad or to put myself above you. The reason I'm telling you this is because I actually give a shit. You want to know who doesn't give a single shit about you? These companies. So knowing how Nvidia operates, the real question becomes, how can AMD change the narrative and how can they use Nvidia's own tactics against them? The first thing that AMD needs to do to crush Nvidia is to stop focusing on promoting the specs. As we just saw, when it comes to choosing between identical expensive tech products, specs have very little to do with consumers' choices. It's an emotional choice, not a logical one. And this has been one of AMD's constant mistakes in the past, and the main reason for their failure in the GPU market in recent years. Instead of focusing on the Navi specs when they announced the cards at CES, they need to focus on creating a narrative. And the narrative must be this: Nvidia are an obstacle in the way of the true enthusiast because they are preventing enthusiasts from getting a next level gaming experience. Through their prohibitive pricing, Nvidia have become a brand for the elites and have forgotten about their faithful supporters who got them to where they are now. And the Navi cards are a counter to this elitism and a counter to this extortion. The Navi cards are not for rich elitists, they are for the free-thinking enthusiasts. These are the types of words and expressions that AMD needs to use when presenting Navi. This is war, and in war you have to strike mercilessly. AMD are not going to capture the masses overnight, so they need to focus on the enthusiasts now more than ever. They need to paint Nvidia as the enemy of the enthusiast and themselves as the enabler of the enthusiast. With the RTX launch, Nvidia has left a door open for AMD to create this narrative. Nvidia are not going to give AMD many other chances to change the positioning of the companies around as they have this year, and AMD needs to capitalize on this if they want to dominate the GPU market. In addition to this narrative, AMD needs to be smart about how they position their brand in terms of status. Multiple studies have shown that people are more vulnerable to suggestion when the subject of the conversation is them. In other words, enthusiasts will be more receptive to changing from Nvidia to AMD when the narrative focuses on their group. AMD needs to capitalize on the RTX ridiculous pricing, not by presenting factual advantages like I showed in those PC builds earlier in the video, not by the practical virtues of choosing the AMD ecosystem over the Intel plus Nvidia one, because that will get them nowhere. To create status around the AMD brand, AMD needs to give the enthusiast the option to create the person they think they are, by aligning themselves with this new AMD mystique. The mystique that AMD is the liberator for the enthusiasts, a brand for those who think freely. They need to create a narrative where AMD used to be the underdog, but will now take over the world with help from the true enthusiast. Does this all sound cringy to you? Does it sound like a dirty scheme that no one would fall for? This type of narrative is what got Apple, a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy just 15 years ago, to being one of the most valuable and richest companies in the world today. Do not underestimate the power of propaganda. It works. In a few weeks, when Lisa Su takes the stage at CES, pay close attention to the narrative that she will create for AMD's 7nm products, particularly for Navi. You'll be able to predict how well their GPUs will sell in 2019 by what type of approach Lisa uses. If Lisa emphasizes Navi's virtues and practical advantages over the Nvidia cards, like they did with their past launches, Navi will fail, just like AMD's other GPUs from the last few years. People are quick to forget, so when Nvidia responds to Navi's announcement by lowering the prices of the RTX cards, enthusiasts who have always bought Nvidia will quickly forget about the price gouging and the anti-consumer practices and will buy the RTX 2070 now that they can actually afford it. But if Lisa, on the other hand, creates the narrative I just presented, then Navi will sell, and a lot of people will convert from Nvidia to AMD. Starting with enthusiasts, AMD can create an army of evangelists for their brand, and sooner or later, Nvidia will crumble to the ground. Now, as a parting note, let me just say this. I'm showing you what AMD needs to do to crush Nvidia. I'm not saying that I want AMD to crush Nvidia or vice versa. There's a difference. I don't have an emotional attachment to any of these companies, and neither should you. Please remember that when you add your opinion in the comments below. The best way to help my channel grow and to get my message to more people is to support me on Patreon. But if you can't contribute financially at this time, please share this video on social media, as that really helps. Thanks for watching, and if you're a patron, I'll see you on Discord.